And welcome back to The Factor Uncensored. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and there's a focus on getting more black men to prioritize their mental health as studies show rates of suicide and depression are increasing with them more than any other group. An actor and therapist spoke with our Fox 26's anchor, Jonathan Martin, about their new Just Heal Bro tour, an effort to get men talking about their trauma and finding a point of healing.
I've been close to that line before. I know what it's like to be depressed. I know what it's like to lose loved ones. I know what it's like to be, to have near-death experiences. I know what it's like to, to at least have the thought like, yeah, what if I jumped off of this balcony?
When I leave my house as a black man, educated, intelligent, self-aware, self-actualized, and all those different things, I still have anxiety, when a cop gets behind me. Am I stuff right?
As you have said before, we've got to go back and kind of unpack some of this pain. A lot of us, we move on with our lives, but we've got something that happened to us at 15, 16 years old. Or younger, that we've never really talked about, that we've never dealt with, and here we are as men in our 30s, 40s, 50s, still dealing with that thing from childhood.
Yeah, and it's so important because right now, Jonathan, black men are leading at a high rate of suicide, and not only just in attempts, but actually succeeding.
This stuff is repressed, and then it comes out typically in this moment of impulse or this moment of, again, stress, strain.
And I had this vision on how could we take the therapeutic and the clinical experience that I see with clients, how can we expose this to the masses, and preferably for men, because men are not individuals that typically journal or talk about their emotions and feelings.
There's so much that people are walking with, and you don't know everybody's story, and everybody has a story. So part of what we're doing here is we're validating your story. We're letting you understand that, yes, you have one, you have the right to have one, you have the right to share it, and you are entitled to your own healing.
And one thing that we have echoed, throughout every tour is helping men understand that they can be both a lion and a lamb. There's duality in our manhood, that everything doesn't have to be about masculinity, strength, but then there's vulnerability and sensitivity.
Know what some of your limitations are, what are your traumas, what are your triggers, and just telling the truth.
And I just want brothers to be open and to really understand that your mental health will determine your quality of life.
Of course, Fox 26 anchor Jonathan Martin is here, making me look short.
Oh man, let me come down a little bit.
And you're our first guest. We're going to talk to you after the break about this very important issue when it comes to African American men. So Stay right there.
I'll be here.
Get shorter. And welcome back to The Factor Uncensored. Fox 26 anchor Jonathan Martin is joining us here on The Factor now. Now, earlier, just before the break, we talked about the skyrocketing rate of suicide among African American men. And you sat down with two individuals, and you would think those individuals are a therapist, also a celebrity, wouldn't have problems. But everyone has problems. And I think the toughest part is talking about it, especially when you're talking about suicide with black men.
Yeah, that's the thing about it. You had LAMMAN, RUCKER, and Jay Barnett, both of them former athletes. They both have had successful careers in their own rights, but everybody has a point of pain, a point of healing, and that's what they talked about. Some people can point back to a specific time in their life. When I was 6 years old, this happened to me, or when I was, went through a divorce or whatever, but some people are still trying to figure out where their point of healing is. And so the point is, we have to talk about it. We have to sit down and do what we just did and have those conversations, because as you know, sometimes as black men, we'll talk about everything else but the real issues on the table.
Exactly. Now, how do you bring them to the table, Jonathan? That's the tough question, getting them to admit that there's a problem, that I'm having these thoughts. We've seen some high-profile deaths recently with African Americans in the news, and they were people who you would never think had anything going wrong with them, but They did.
Yeah, they call that high functioning. People who just seem to kind of go about their days normal, look great, sound great, but there's something going on. But what they really do in this tour, which I think is so important, they provide a safe space for black men to just be themselves, to let loose and talk. And what they pointed out that this is not therapy, you know, but this is a therapeutic experience that hopefully will give people the tools to then go and have those conversations. So it's incumbent upon us as friends, as coworkers, to sometimes just pull each other aside and say, how you doing, man? Beyond the surface stuff. And I think that's where they say it can start, just with a simple conversation, letting people know that you're there and that you're listening.
And does it help to have more therapists that may look like us?
Oh, yeah.
Where you can go talk to someone and you can relate to them.
Yeah, there's definitely a lack of therapists that look like you and look like me, and that's one of the reasons that they are traveling around on this nationwide tour, so people can see folks who look like Jay Barnett. There's other psychologists that they bring along, different celebrities, different athletes, because it is important. You naturally a lot of times feel more comfortable sharing your information, sharing your background with someone who looks like you and perhaps understands you.
And for those who are interested in this program and this tour, where can they find out more information, and when will it be in Houston?
Yeah, so actually they were here in Houston tonight, actually. I think with the weather, hopefully they were still able to kick it off tonight. But
Damn it, Jonathan, you should have told us earlier.
I know. But hey, you know, with social media, they're everywhere. They also were just in Dallas. They're going to be in Atlanta. They're going to be in Charleston, South Carolina. So just go to Just Heal Bro on social media. You can find more information. But hopefully this conversation among us brothers will continue.
All right, Jonathan Martin, thank you so much. We'll be back with more Factor in a moment.